Building a DIY NAS on a budget can be really difficult, especially when it comes to finding a good case. So often, cases only either have room for a couple of drives, or they just absolutely wreck your wallet. So that's why today I'm putting together not one, but two budget DIY NAS systems in these affordable cases. Okay, this one's a little bit expensive, but this one costs less than $100. So let's get started. I'm really excited to build in these two cases, but before that, I want to briefly talk about the sponsor of today's video, private internet access. And I know because you're watching this channel, many of you are already saying, oh, why would I want a VPN? I already self-host my own VPN server. And that's awesome. A VPN is a great way to encrypt your network traffic to help mask your IP address, or keep you safer, for example, on a public Wi-Fi network. And even if you already host your own VPN, private internet access is a great fit to run alongside it. Not only can it act as a backup in case your server goes down, but it also has a lot of great benefits. First of all, you can select from tons of servers across 91 different countries. Sometimes the content I want to watch or the resources I need are geo-restricted, and private internet access is an invaluable tool for me to help bypass those restrictions. And you might have noticed that some streaming services are cracking down on VPN usage, but by using the streaming optimized servers, I had no issues watching my favorite shows and movies. One of the best features of private internet access is that you can run it on as many devices as you want across multiple platforms, including, wait for it, Linux. But wait, it gets even better. You can run it in the command line. They also have a strict no logs policy that's been verified by multiple third-party audits. So whether you're looking to start using a VPN or run another alongside your self-hosted server, make sure to check out private internet access. If you use my link down in the description, you can grab an 83% discount, as well as 4 months entirely for free. So I said we're going to build two budget NAS systems today, but really we're just going to build one, which is going to replace my current TrueNAS server. Then I'm going to gut that current TrueNAS server and put those parts in the second case to be my new local backup. And like I said earlier, we're going to be using these two cases to do that. In my experience, putting together an inexpensive system to run something like TrueNAS, Unraid, or Open Media Vault has been fairly simple. You can just pick up some used components off of eBay, or even repurpose an old gaming machine or even a used office PC, and then if you don't have enough SATA ports, chuck in an HBA or a 10 gig card for some faster networking. But for me at least, one of the hardest parts has always been finding a good case, especially if you want a lot of hard drives. In the original NAS I built, I managed to pick up this used Antec 300 for just $20, I think, which provided plenty of room for my very humble little 4-drive setup. I knew that if I ever wanted to upgrade to more than 6 drives, I would need to take advantage of the 3 5¼ bays. While I could have bought an adapter or even 3D printed one like I did here, I wanted to see what other options might exist out there. I could have picked up something like one of these used Supermicro ATX chassis, but I don't have a server rack, and I imagine many of you don't either. The HL15 from 45 drives is readily available, but also costs $800. So that's how I landed on these two cases. This one here is the Fractal Define 7 XL, and it's not new by any means. There are actually quite a few videos out there on using this desktop ATX case for a NAS system, and that's for good reason. When in the storage layout, you can mount up to 16 3.5-inch hard drives, as well as a few more 2.5-inch drives. Plus there's a ton of space for massive motherboards, a plethora of PCIe cards, tons of fans, and whatever else you might want to chuck in this thing. One downside of this case is that it only comes with 6 hard drive trays, so if you want to add more drives, you'll have to buy a few more. Or if you're like me and you own a 3D printer, you can just print some more. God, I love 3D printing. I haven't built in this thing yet, but the quality is already noticeable. Everything just feels good. Nothing seems flimsy or cheap, and I'm really excited to finally get to build a NAS in this thing. This case isn't necessarily cheap though, coming in at around $230, plus however much you might need to spend on more hard drive trays, or just a 3D printer. If you're not wanting to spend that kind of money and you also don't quite need 16 hard drives, you could check out something like this Classico Storage Master from Dark Rock. I completely forgot who it was, but someone commented about this case on one of my previous videos and I immediately went out and bought one for $80. Oh yeah, that reminds me. I did buy the Dark Rock case, but Fractal was kind enough to send over the Define 7 XL, which really made the total cost of this video a little bit easier to swallow. Like I said, I picked up this Dark Rock case for $80, which happened to be on sale, but I've seen that sale price quite a bit, but if you don't catch it, you'll have to pay $90. Other than the fact that this is able to hold a lot of hard drives, it's sort of the opposite of the Define 7 XL. It's kind of the epitome of you get what you pay for. It does hold 10 3.5-inch hard drives, or 11 if you want to put one in this dorky little spot, and there's actually a 12th spot, but you can't actually put a hard drive there because it's blocked by one of the other hard drive cages. The case is made of pretty thin and flimsy sheet metal, one of the fan adapters I had was dead on arrival, and the whole thing just feels kind of cheap, especially when the Define 7 is sitting right here. And while neither one of these cases have the conveniences of sliding drive trays or a backplane like you might get in other NAS appliances, the process for removing or adding drives in the Classico Storage Master is kind of a massive pain, which we'll cover here more in a bit. Now, neither of these cases are very useful without systems to go in them. One of those systems is going to be repurposed from my old TrueNAS system, but what about the new system? Well, really quick, I do want to be clear that while I wanted this build to be a budget build of sorts, I did splurge in other ways because, well, this is going to be my main NAS that I use for all of my video projects and editing, as well as backing up all of my computers and personal files. So I wanted it to be a little bit more rock solid than maybe some other projects in other videos. So take from this what you will. For the motherboard, I picked up the Supermicro X10 SRH-CF, which supports Intel E5 V3 and V4 Xeons. For the CPU, I grabbed a used E5 2620V4, which has 8 cores, 16 threads, and base and turbo frequencies of 2.1 and 3 GHz respectively. Honestly, this CPU is a little bit overkill for my needs for this simple TrueNAS system, but it does give me plenty of cores and threads in case I do, for some reason, want to run some virtual machines or other services on this NAS down the road. I also needed a cooler, so I picked up this new Noctua NH-U9DX i4. I didn't go for this server motherboard for the CPU, but rather some of its other features like support for 256GB of registered ECC DDR4 memory. I just bought 64GB of registered ECC DDR4, which leaves me room to expand to 128GB down the road. One of the best features of this motherboard, at least in the Define 7 XL, is that I'll never need to buy an HBA or anything to add some more SATA ports. It has 10 SATA ports on the board, but also has an embedded Broadcom 3008 SAS3 controller. That's hooked up to these two mini SAS headers, which, with some breakout cables, can connect to 4 drives each for a total of 18 SATA ports. I'm going to install the operating system on 2 cheap mirrored SATA SSDs, which leaves exactly 16 SATA ports for the 16 drive bays. For a 10 gigabit connection, I'll be adding in a used Dell card that I fixed with a piece of tape. Go check out that video if you're curious. I also ordered a new Seasonic 550W 80+ gold power supply to power everything. After also grabbing a few SATA power splitters and some SATA cables, the entire cost for this system was right around $670-ish. But I still haven't added the hard drives, and this is the unescapable gut punch that comes with trying to build a DIY NAS system. No matter how much money you save on the system, you're still gonna have to pay a pretty penny for all of the hard drives, especially for a larger NAS system. I could have picked up some refurbished enterprise drives to save some money, which I did do for the second NAS build, but for this one, I decided to play it safe and bought 8 Seagate Exos X18 14TB drives, which cost me right around $1,800. That brings the entire system cost to a little over $2,400. Now you might be wondering why I only bought 8 drives when this case has room for 16, but did you not hear the part where I said I spent $1,800 on drives? While I am a YouTuber and that automatically makes me a shill, I don't just have another $1,800 lying around, so I decided to go with 8 for now, knowing that I can fairly easily add another 8 drives down the road if I need to, and if I can come up with another $1,800. I'm getting a little bit tired of talking about these systems though, so let's start building them. Now before just throwing everything in the case, I have the motherboard, as well as the CPU and RAM, and I'm going to throw all of that together just to make sure the base system actually works before we go through all the trouble of trying to put it all in the Fractal Define 7 XL. So let's see if all of these parts from eBay actually work. I think that was the worst thermal paste I've ever done. Alright, it took a while, but the system is up and running. All of our memory is showing up, our CPU is correct, so I think we should be good to go ahead and start building this first NAS. Now, before we can just start throwing that system or hard drives into this case, we need to transform it into what's called the storage layout, because right now, other than for these 4 little drive bays down at the bottom, we don't have any place to actually put our hard drives. So I'm going to follow the handy dandy user guide and transform this into the storage layout. Let's go. So it is actually a little bit tricky to get these trays in here, but they can go in there, so now I should be able to go ahead and start putting this system together. All right, it's done, and I think it looks pretty darn amazing. This case is awesome. It did take me a little bit to get used to the weird mounting mechanism of the drive brackets, but once I kind of sorted it out, it wasn't that difficult, although I still would have preferred something a little bit more solid, but since this case is designed to be extremely flexible, I kind of get why they went the route they did. But other than that, it was incredibly easy to build in, and it was honestly a lot of fun, and this case does cost a lot of money, but I see why people seem to like it so much even after quite a few years of being on the market. The only downside I really noticed is this thing is just extremely heavy. I actually hurt my knee trying to move it around earlier, and I actually think I might 3D print some cool wheel mount brackets thanks to Level 1 Techs. Also, one other thing I forgot to mention was that I decided to swap out this top plate from the solid one that came on it to this open grid top cover that was in the accessories box. I'm hoping that'll give a little bit more airflow and allow some of the heat from all these drives to just rise up out of the top of the case, but it also might let a lot more dust in since I don't have any fans to exhaust any air out of this, but we'll see. I'm gonna leave this on for now, and then over a few months, if it gets extremely dusty, I might decide to change back to the solid cover. For now, this guy is done. It's time to move on to the other NAS. Now, building in this case is going to be a little bit less exciting because we're essentially just doing a case swap from my previous NAS into this new case. This system has another Supermicro motherboard with an i3-4130, I believe, 32 gigs of DDR3, and then 4 10TB Toshiba drives. 40 terabytes of raw storage isn't going to quite cut it though, so I actually picked up 4 of these HGST drives that were sold as renewed. I actually picked up 5 so I'd have an extra one just in case. And yeah, I don't know how I don't know how reliable these are really going to be. They were only like $85 a piece. This is the backup NAS. I don't need it to be quite as resilient as the other one, and I'm going to set all 8 of these up in RAID Z2, so I should be able to have 2 drives fail without losing any data. So hopefully that should be good enough. Hopefully this isn't too much of a gamble, but I already spent a lot of money on this project and I didn't really want to spend much more. So let's go ahead and take all of the guts as well as these new drives and chuck them in this Dark Rock case.
One day later.
I'm done. I really thought this was going to be one of those situations where I just show some cool B-roll of me assembling this system and then some B-roll of it all put together and it'd just be great. But sadly that wasn't the case when building in this, well, case. Some of the issues were my fault, but some of them just stem from the fact that this, well, it is a very cheap case. The first big issue I ran into was that, well, this motherboard only has 6 SATA ports, and I need at least 9 for the 8 hard drives and then another one for the SATA boot drive. And I have no idea how I didn't notice that when I was planning out this video. I don't know what I was thinking. So the only solution I could come up with parts I already had on hand was to install an HBA that would allow me to hook up all 8 hard drives. But the problem there was I only had 2 very short mini SAS2 SATA cables that also don't have 90-degree adapters, which comes into play here in a bit. But it did at least let me hook all of these drives up. However, that card gets really hot if it's not in a server chassis with like forced airflow. So that's why I have this little fan here on a 3D printed bracket. I guess that's one thing I can shout out about this case is it does have these vertical PCIe slots. It is kind of a benefit if you're building like a home server build and you want to throw in some enterprise cards for networking or like an HBA for adding more drives. You could theoretically just add a fan over here on the side to cool all of those. It's a bit janky, but in this instance, it should work. Another issue was I didn't realize when I ordered those 10 terabyte renewed hard drives that they come with a power disable feature. If you were plugging those drives into a more modern server or NAS, it would come with the benefit of being able to save some power and also like hard reset the drives remotely. But when using them with an older power supply, I could be wrong here, but the 3.3 volt power rail that goes to that is what's used for that feature, and so it would basically just keep it in like a reset loop. These drives did come with a cheap adapter, but I didn't quite trust those because they were like the molded kind that maybe can catch on fire. So what I did instead was I used one of these 4-way SATA splitters that use a crimped connection, which is safer, and then I just snipped off the 3.3 volt rail, and it seems like that's working just fine. Now, all of the other issues I ran into were just because this case is a very cheap case. I know $90 might not seem cheap, but it seems like a big chunk of that is the tax you just pay for having a somewhat niche case with a lot of hard drive base. Because working in this thing really feels like I'm building in a cheap $50 or $60 case. The metal is extremely thin and flimsy, and like At times I was bending stuff and I didn't mean to be bending stuff. Doing cable management on the back is not easy. Like the clips for running a lot of the cables up the middle aren't big enough to even fit in the 24 pin cable. There's just not a lot of space and not a lot of convenience. And you may have noticed that all of the cabling for these drives is on the front, and that wasn't my original plan. I originally put all of these drives in with the drives facing backwards so I could do all of the cable management back here in the back. But because I didn't have 90-degree adapters on these, I just couldn't get the back panel on. There's not enough space back there, and for a case that's being sold with the sole purpose of having a lot of hard drive bays, that also comes with a lot more cables, and really I feel like they should have designed the case around that a bit more and provided a little bit more room. So sadly, I had to flip all of the hard drives around, which took forever, and then do the cables on the front because there's just a little bit more clearance on the front compared to the back, but it still takes quite a bit of effort to get this front panel on, and it still kind of smushes these cables. But it all seems to be in here. It seems to be working. I powered it on one time just to make sure everything spun up. This is not quite the build I wanted it to be. I'm probably going to do a rebuild of this system at some point once I get both of these systems up and running, but that's for a later video. Oh yeah, there is one really nice thing about this case in comparison to the Define 7 XL, and that's that with the same amount of hard drives, this case is like half the weight, I feel like. I can actually like pick this up reasonably, but picking that thing up hurts. It is so heavy. So I actually 3D printed some of these feet here, thanks to Level 1 Techs, that let you put in some wheels so you can actually roll this thing around, which is hopefully going to make it much easier to get it back to my storage closet. Now, I don't have the rubber wheels because I just stole these off of an old office chair, so I'll have to be careful not to roll this thing really fast because I don't want the vibrations to kill that. So I'll take it slow, but it will make this much easier to move around. So I'm gonna get these installed, and then we're gonna get the servers back in the closet, turn them on, and hope everything works. I really hope everything works. Okay, so it's actually been quite a few days since I last recorded because I ran into a few hiccups. Some of those things were personal life things, and we also had some severe storms here with some power outages and such, but I also had some issues with our servers. And surprisingly, the biggest issue had nothing to do with the older system, but actually came from the newer system, specifically one of the brand new Seagate drives. One of those drives started throwing a lot of errors and failed a long smart test, and unfortunately I didn't catch all of that on camera. There's also another one of those drives that appeared to possibly have some bad sectors, but then passed a long smart test, so I'm just going to keep a watchful eye on that one. Fortunately though, I ordered an extra Seagate drive, so I was able to very quickly swap them out, and I'll be RMAing the bad drive. Also, having wheels on that case was amazing and made the drive swap so much easier. So if you happen to pick up that case, make sure and get some wheels. Now, because of those issues and having to wait for smart tests to run and drive swaps and all of that, I did get the data moved from my old server to the new server, but I'm going to continue using that server as the backup for a bit, just until I can make sure that everything's working smoothly, and then eventually I'll switch them over to using the newer server and the Define 7 XL as my main NAS. The older system, which is the current NAS I'm primarily using and will become the backup, is running great, and all 4 of those 10 terabyte renewed drives passed a long smart test and seem to be working just fine. Having both of these systems down in the bottom of my networking closet does present a few issues. First of all, having both copies of my data right next to each other sort of eliminates some of the effectiveness of having a backup. Also, having both of those systems with a lot more drives did create a bit more heat than I was expecting, but it's nothing too bad and I'm not that worried about it just yet. Eventually, I'll probably look into setting up a power schedule or just find a way to actually make the drive spin down to save a bit of power and generate a little bit less heat. I also had to get a bigger UPS, but that was something I planned on doing anyway. While I did have a few issues with the hard drives, both systems seemed to be up and running, and I got some good experience building in both of these cases. So, what are my thoughts? Well, starting with the Define 7 XL, it's amazing. Other than the fact that it's a bit expensive and is just massive, there's nothing I really don't like about it. Originally, I didn't think I liked the drive mounting system, but after I got all of the drives in and actually had to perform a drive swap, I found that I actually kind of like it. It works fairly well and's pretty straightforward and lets you fit a lot of drives into that case. There's also tons of room for flexibility and expandability, it's incredibly easy to work on, and there's just some nice creature comforts and everything just feels and looks good. You also just get the sense that that case is going to last and not bend or break or fall apart over time. If you're looking to build a large home server or a NAS system with a lot of drives, and you want a high quality case that's going to last and not need to be upgraded, it's hard for me not to recommend the Fractal Define 7 XL, even though it does cost quite a bit. Just make sure you pick up wheels. Now, moving on to the Darkrock Classico Storage Master, and this one gave me quite a bit of mixed feelings. On one hand, it's not easy to work in, it's very cheap and flimsy, and there's a good chance, in my opinion, you might run into some quality control issues. The drive cage system is also really annoying. I hate that you have to remove 4 screws to then take off a cage that has 2 drives that you both have to unplug. It's just kind of frustrating and not that fun to mess with. But that's not even the biggest issue. It's a bit frustrating that for a case designed to hold a bunch of drives, it doesn't have the room for all of the cables you need for those drives. I only installed 8 hard drives, and I'm glad I didn't try to install 2 more down at the bottom because, frankly, I don't know how I would have been able to shove all of the cables down there and make it all fit. I really wish they would have added like 1 centimeter to the width of this case, just to give a little bit more breathing room on either side for cables. I'm not even asking for nice, fancy cable management channels or anything like that. It would just help to have a little bit more space on either side to make sure you can get all of the cables plugged in without having to get very specific 90-degree adapters for every single drive. But that being said, find me another case that has support for 10 3.5-inch hard drives, or technically 11, for less than $100. If you're looking to build a somewhat large ATX NAS system on an extremely tight budget, this case might be your best option. Just make sure to pick up some 90-degree cables and adapters to make your life a bit easier. Also, there's one thing I sort of forgot to mention, which is the Fractal Define 7 non-XL. For some reason, I thought this slightly smaller version didn't have the storage layout, but I was wrong, and I believe it actually supports up to 14 3.5-inch hard drives. So if you don't want something that's quite as big as the Define 7 XL, that might be worth checking out. I think it's about $40 less than the XL version, and around $100 more than something like the Classico Storage Master. I had a lot of fun checking out these cases and putting together these systems, and I really hope you guys enjoyed following along. If you liked this video and you want to see more like it, maybe hit the subscribe button, and maybe hit the like button to support the channel. And if you want to support the channel even more, you might consider becoming a raid member. For as little as $1 a month, you get early access to videos, as well as a few other cool perks like some bonus content. If you're interested, I'll have some links down in the description. But I think that's pretty much it for this one, so as always, thank you guys so much for watching, stay curious, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.